In 2026, a fleet crossed 11 light years to take a small town in New Zealand. Their invasion manual said one thing: find the fear and the world falls. Then 200 people walked out of a steaming valley, stamped the ground once, and roared. Nothing in that manual explained what happened next. If you love stories where humanity refuses to break, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this one with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment the moment you reach the part where the ground itself answers back. Now let us move forward together into the day an invasion went completely, permanently quiet. There are easier places to invade than Rotorua. There are flatter places and drier places, and places where the ground stays where you put it. There are places where the air does not smell faintly of struck matches, and where a parking space does not occasionally turn into a steam vent overnight. The Vesson Dominion knew none of this. Their survey team had studied the North Island of New Zealand from orbit for 9 days, and had produced a document that would later be read aloud, very slowly, at a hearing that ruined 4 careers. The document described the Rotorua district as low density, low technology, geologically unstable, and culturally non-combatant. It noted that the local population gathered in large groups to perform what the survey called recreational chanting. It rated the region as a soft entry point. The phrase recreational chanting was later underlined by 3 separate Vesson officers, in 3 separate reports, in 3 different shades of regret. Rotorua sits on the southern shore of a wide lake in the Bay of Plenty, inside one of the most active geothermal fields on the planet. The city holds around 70,000 people. It also holds boiling mud pools in a public park, a geyser that throws water 30 meters into the air on a good morning, forests of redwoods planted more than a century ago, and a smell that visitors notice for about 2 days before their brain quietly gives up and stops reporting it. The ground there is not solid, it is a crust. In some places that crust is 3 meters thick. In some places it is the thickness of a dinner plate, and under it is water at 130 degrees. Every local child learns the same rule before they learn to ride a bike. Stay on the path, watch the steam. If the grass is a strange color, the grass is lying to you. The Vesson survey did not include that rule. At 6 in the morning on a cold Tuesday, Hemi Ngata was already awake, because he was 64 and his knees kept their own schedule. Hemi was a Kaumatua, an elder of his Mary on the western edge of the city, and for 31 years he had taught Kappa Haka to anyone who turned up. He had taught farmers, dentists, 2 members of parliament, and 1 very determined Australian. He had a voice that could carry across a full car park without effort, and a habit of pausing before he spoke, which made people nervous for reasons they could never explain. That morning he was setting up for a rehearsal. Regionals were coming. His group had 42 performers, 1 broken speaker, and a shortage of chairs. Across town, at a conference room in a hotel on Fenton Street, Commander Ray Alden of the United States Navy was drinking the worst coffee of his professional life. Ray was 47, from Ohio, and he was in New Zealand for a joint civil defense exercise, which is a polite way of saying he had flown 11,000 kilometers to sit in a room and pretend a volcano had gone off. Beside him sat Walt Briggs, an American volcanologist on a 2-year exchange with the New Zealand Geological Service. Walt was 52, wore the same fleece every day, and had the calm of a man who had personally watched the Earth open up and had decided it was interesting rather than alarming. Scenario 4, Ray read from his folder. Hydrothermal eruption, Central City mass evacuation, estimated response time. Depends, Walt said, on what the ground feels like doing. That is not a response time. It is the honest one. At 2 minutes past 7, the light outside changed. It did not get darker in the way clouds do. It got darker the way a room gets darker when someone very large stands in the doorway. The windows of the hotel began to buzz at a frequency that made everyone's back teeth ache. Ray was outside in 11 seconds. Walt followed at a walk because Walt did not run for anything that was not lava. The Vesson command ship had come in over the Mamaku Ranges and settled above the lake, and it was enormous. It was a flattened black wedge, perhaps 600 meters across, with 4 downward-facing pylons that glowed a deep and unpleasant blue. Beneath it, smaller craft peeled away like seeds off a dandelion and dropped toward the city. Around the lakefront, people came out of houses and cafes and stood in the road and looked up. Nobody screamed. A few people said a word that will not appear in this story. One woman finished parking first. At the Mary, Hemi walked out onto the grass with a coil of speaker cable still in his hand. His nephew's boy, Ricky Mahuta, 18 years old, came running from the war with his radio headset around his neck. "Uncle, Uncle, the repeater is down, all of them." "Cell is gone too." Hemi looked at the shape hanging over the water. He looked at it for a long time. "Ricky," he said, "go and get everyone off the geothermal reserve, the tourists, all of them." "Now, why?" "Because those things are going to land on it," Hemi said. "And I do not want anyone standing next to them when they do." The first Vesson landing craft touched down 4 minutes later. In the soft green grass, beside a mud pool in the middle of a public park called Curacao. The grass was lying. Curacao Park is 18 hectares of public reserve in the center of Rotorua, and it is free to enter, which visitors always find surprising. Because large parts of it are actively boiling. There are footpaths, there are handrails. There are signs in 4 languages that say, with admirable restraint, danger, thermal activity, stay on the path. The Vesson landing craft came down 30 meters off the path. For about 9 seconds, nothing happened. The ramp lowered. 8 Vesson troopers came down it in a tight wedge, and they were an impressive sight, if you like that sort of thing. They stood a little over 2 meters tall, with long limbs and dark bronze plating, and helmets that swept back into a ridge. Their visors carried a row of pale amber lenses. Their rifles hummed. Then the 3rd trooper in the wedge stepped off the harder ground. His left leg went through the crust up to the knee, and the sound he made was not translated by any device on either side, because it did not need to be. His squad leader, Captain Orvek, ordered a retrieval. 2 troopers moved to help him. One of those 2 learned a second important lesson about Rotorua, which is that the ground you are standing on to rescue somebody is often the same ground that ate them. Within 90 seconds, the Vesson had 4 troopers partially submerged, 1 landing craft settling at an angle it had not planned on, and a tactical situation that their doctrine had no entry for. From behind the handrail, roughly 40 meters away, a woman named Aroha Katin watched with her arms folded. Aroha was 53, ran a small kitchen off Tutenkai Street, and had walked her dog through that park every morning for 20 years. "There is a sign," she said to nobody. "There is a very clear sign." Captain Orvek raised his weapon and turned toward her, and a translator built into his chest plate produced a booming announcement across the park. "People of this territory, your world now belongs to the Vesson Dominion. Resistance will be answered without limit." Aroha did not move. "You have parked in a thermal area," she said. Orvek's translator took a moment. "Your local concerns are irrelevant. Not to the council, they are not." Aroha pointed with her chin. "That mud is 100 degrees. Your friend is going to lose a leg, and then you are going to lose a lawsuit." The Vesson Dominion had taken 23 inhabited worlds, and their method never changed. Land in the middle of a population. Cut the communications. Broadcast a demand loudly enough and long enough, and the fear does the rest. Their entire military doctrine rested on a single measured truth. When a species is frightened, it scatters, and a scattered species can be herded. They cut the power to Rotorua at 7:20. They cut every tower and repeater in the district. They flooded the sky over the lake with 300 drones. The city responded by getting out the generators. Half of Rotorua had a generator, because half of Rotorua had grown up in a place where the power went out when a tree fell on the line in the Mammakus. Petrol stoves came off shelves. Cold stores got emptied into chilly bins. Somebody at the fire station started a whiteboard. By 8:15, while the Vesson were still broadcasting surrender terms in 4 languages, the Rotorua branch of a national supermarket chain had switched to cash only and formed an orderly queue. At the Mary, Hemi found Ricky in the corner of the meeting house with a car battery, a length of wire, and a radio the size of a shoebox. "That still works. It is a valve set," Ricky said without looking up. "It is older than Dad. It does not care what they are jamming. It cares about the wire being long enough." He clipped a lead on. "Uncle, listen." He turned a dial and the room filled with a sound. It was not speech. It was a low, steady, pulsing drone, sitting far down at the bottom of hearing, more felt in the chest than heard in the ear. It rose and fell in a slow 4 count. Hemi went very still. Aroha arrived at the Mary at 9, having walked, because there was an alien landing craft on Ranulph Street, and she was not going to reverse past it. Ray Alden and Walt Briggs arrived 11 minutes after that in a hotel courtesy van, because Ray had gone looking for somebody in charge and had been directed by 3 separate people to the Mary. "I am looking for the local commander," Ray said at the gate. "You are looking for a cup of tea first," said Aroha. "That is how it works here. Sit down." "Ma'am, there is an invasion." "There is." "And there is also a kettle." She looked at him. "Which one of those is going to run out?" Ray Alden had commanded a guided missile destroyer. He sat down. Meanwhile, on the far side of the city, the Vessin made their second serious mistake of the day. A squad of 6 moved through the back of a property in Ngongataha, clearing what their readout described as an unregistered heat signature, roughly 2 meters across, buried. Temperature 90 degrees, possible concealed weapon emplacement. It was a hangi. A hangi is an earth oven. You dig a pit, you burn a fire down onto stones until the stones glow. You lay in baskets of pork and chicken and kumara and cabbage. You cover the whole thing in wet sacking and soil. And you leave it for 3.5 hours, and then you eat the best meal of your life. This particular hangi had been laid down at 5 that morning for the Broughton family reunion, which had been booked for 14 months and had 68 confirmed guests. Trooper Nesh probed it with the butt of his rifle, then he stood on it. The sacking gave. Nesh went into the waste among the hot stones and came out of that pit faster than any Vessin had ever moved in recorded history, trailing steam and one entire shoulder of pork. Tama Broughton was 24, worked a chainsaw in the forestry block, and played front row for his club on Saturdays. He had been carrying a stack of trays across the lawn. He put the trays down very carefully. "That," said Tama, "was for Nan." The Vessin After Action report for the Ngongataha incident ran to 11 lines. 9 of them concerned the loss of a squad rifle. The remaining 2 attempted, and failed, to explain how a non-combatant civilian had removed a Vessin trooper's helmet using only his hands and a strong opinion. By midday, the Dominion had lost 4 troopers to the ground, 2 to a family lunch, and 1 to a paddock fence that a farmer had electrified specifically because of pigs. And in the meeting house, Ricky Mahuta had recorded 11 minutes of the alien carrier signal, and Hemi Ngata had listened to all 11 minutes with his eyes shut. When it finished, Hemi opened his eyes. "It is out of time," he said. Ricky blinked. "What? That thing?" Hemi nodded at the radio. "It is holding a beat, and it is holding it badly. It drags on the 3rd. He stood up. "Go and get everybody, all of them. And bring your uncle's speakers." They gathered in the Warranui at 2 in the afternoon, and because they gathered on a Mary, they did it properly. There was a call. There were speeches. There was a moment where Commander Ray Alden of the United States Navy realized that the correct military response was to shut up and follow the man in front of him, and did so. Then everybody sat down and got to work. There were about 90 people in the meeting house and another 300 outside. Wetu Ruwidi, 31, a guide who had walked visitors through the geothermal valley 6 days a week for a decade, unrolled a survey map across the floor and weighed the corners down with mugs. "Right," she said. "This is the crust map. Green is safe. Yellow is safe if you are light and you are quick. Red is not ground, it is a lid." Walt Briggs crouched over it and made a small, approving noise. "That is a better map than the one we use." "That is because ours has to be right," Wetu said. "Yours only has to be published." Ray laid out what he had. "Their ships are holding a standard low envelope. They have air superiority, thermal optics, energy weapons, and armor that stops rifle rounds. We have hunting rifles, shotguns, 1 satellite phone that they are jamming, and no support until the defense force reaches us, which is not today." "So we lose," said someone at the back. "No," said Walt. He tapped the map. "We are standing on the largest pressure vessel in the southern hemisphere, and they landed on top of it. Let me say what I have been trying to say all morning. Their armor is sealed against dust and heat. It is not sealed against us. Meaning hydrogen sulfide." Walt looked around the room. "That is the smell. It is why silver goes black here in a week. It is why the electronics in this town die twice as fast as anywhere else in the country. It eats copper, it eats contacts. It gets into every seal and it does not come out. Aroha nodded slowly. My till gave up in 8 months. Your till, said Walt, was a warning. Ricky plugged the radio into the borrowed speakers and played 11 minutes of Alien Drone into a room full of Kappa Haka performers. The reaction was immediate and it was not fear. It was the specific irritation of 40 people who have spent their lives learning to keep time. Hemi let it play, then he stopped it. That signal is how they stay together, he said. Ricky, tell them. It is a carrier, Ricky said. Every trooper, every drone, every walker, they are all locked to it. It runs at about 18 hertz with the harmonics stacked above. That is why the windows buzz, and he hesitated. It sits almost exactly where a full Haka sits when you have got enough people doing it. The room went quiet. Say that again, said Ray, chest voice, 200 people. Stamping in unison on this ground. Ricky swallowed. It is the same band, sir. Walt sat back on his heels. The stamping is the part I would worry about if I were them. This crust transmits. That is why we can feel a truck 2 streets away. Wedu was already looking at Hemi. Uncle. The reserve, I know. If they put that ship low over the flats and the ground gets excited underneath it, Uncle, that is not a plan. That is a hydrothermal eruption. Curau went up in 2001, Walt said mildly, and again in 2003. No warning either time, mud 200 meters out, he shrugged. The ground here does not need our permission, it just occasionally needs an excuse. That was the moment the plan stopped being a hope and started being a schedule. But there was one more thing that had to be answered, and Hemi answered it before anyone asked. He stood up and picked up a teaha from the wall. It was carved wood, a little longer than a man, worn smooth at the grip. I want to be clear with everybody in this house, he said. A Haka is not a trick. It is not a weapon we hide in a drawer and take out for aliens. It is who we are, and it is for the living. If we do this, we do it properly, we do it with our own words, and we do it because we are standing on our own ground, not because it works. Nobody argued. Good, said Hemi. Now. Let us find out if it works. They spent the afternoon proving it. The first proof came at 4 o'clock, on the silica flats above the valley, where a Vesson scout walker had been sweeping since noon. It was a 12-ton machine on 4 legs, with a turret and a very good thermal sensor, and it had been steadily driving people back toward the city. Wedu Ruidi walked out onto the flats alone, in a high-visibility jacket at a stroll. The walker turned toward her. Its pilot logged a lone, unarmed civilian, threat rating minimal, and moved to intercept across what its sensor reported as flat, dry, stable terrain. The sensor was reading heat. On the flats above the valley, everything reads as heat. Wedu was on a path her grandfather had shown her. It is about 1.5 meters wide, and it wanders like a drunk, and it exists because it is the only part of that ground with rock underneath it. She did not hurry. She did not look back. The walker took 11 strides off the path before the crust let go. It went down at an angle, front left leg first, and by the time the pilot understood what was happening, the machine was in up to the belly plate in water that had been sitting at 126 degrees, since before anyone in that valley had a surname. Steam came up around it in a white column. Every seal it had began, quietly, to have the worst day of its service life. 200 meters away, at the edge of the reserve, Tama Broughton was waiting beside a truck. It was a flatbed tanker, and it belonged to a thermal spa. And it was full of 11,000 liters of gray geothermal mud that had been collected that morning for mineral treatments at $40 a session. Is this legal? Ray Alden asked. It is mud, said Tama. It is a chemical agent. It is a face mask, said Aroha from the passenger seat. And they can pay for it like everybody else. Tama backed the tanker to the edge of the good ground and opened the rear valve. The Vesson Walker's gunner had just restored one damaged lens, which meant that he was, uniquely among his crew, able to watch what was coming. His final transmission before the machine went dark was a question. He asked his commander what the substance was. His commander, on a ship 600 meters above the lake, looked at the readout and said the only honest thing available to him. I do not know, he would find out. Fleet Commander Dravith would find out a great many things in the next 11 hours, and almost all of them would be new, and none of them would be good. Because at that exact moment, on the lake road below him, 206 people had begun to walk toward the city center in 4 ranks, and they were not running. And every biological sensor on his flagship had just started screaming. Fleet Commander Dravith had spent his entire career trusting the fear map, and until that afternoon. The fear map had never once been wrong. It worked like this. Every Vessin warship carried an array that read biological stress across a whole population at once. Heart rate, pupil dilation, skin conductivity, adrenal chemistry. On 23 worlds, the pattern had been identical. The moment the ships appeared, the map lit up in bright arterial red, and then the red ran. It ran away from the ships, and it pooled where the people hid, and the Dominion simply followed the pooling and took whatever it found there. Fear was not a side effect of a Vessin invasion. Fear was the instrument. Their weapons herded it. Their drones tracked it. Their entire doctrine was built on the certainty that a frightened population moves away from the thing that frightens it. At 6:05 that evening, the map over Rotorua went bright red, exactly as it always did, and then it came toward him. "Report," said Dravith. Sub-Analyst Pell was already sweating in the way that his species did, which involved a faint mist and a lot of apologizing. "Commander, mass stress event. 206 individuals in the Central District. Heart rates elevated between 140 and 170. Full adrenal load. Pupil dilation at maximum. Vocal output rising. Panic," said Dravith. "Good, where are they going?" "To us, Commander. Say again." "They are walking toward the landing zone," Pell said. "In formation." In step, Dravith crossed to the analyst station and looked at the array himself, because 30 years of service had taught him that subordinates sometimes read numbers incorrectly. And because he badly wanted this to be one of those times. It was not one of those times. Down on the lake road, the front rank came around the corner by the gardens, and Captain Orvek's ground force saw them for the first time. There were men and women. There were people in work boots and people in high-visibility jackets, and one man still wearing a supermarket apron. There were teenagers in the second rank and grandmothers in the third. Hemi Ngata walked out 3 paces ahead of all of them with a teaha held level across his body, and he was not hurrying either. Every visor in the Vessin line reported the same thing. Maximum threat arousal, maximum aggression chemistry, 0 withdrawal behavior. Hemi stopped 20 meters from the Vessin line. Then he did something that no invasion manual in the galaxy had an entry for. He performed a Wiro. A Wiro is a challenge, and it is one of the oldest things on those islands. A warrior comes forward alone in front of his people, and he moves with the weapon, and he lays down a token on the ground in front of the visitor. And then he steps back, and he waits. And what the visitor does next tells everybody watching exactly what kind of visitor they are. If you pick it up and hold it, you have come in peace. If you do anything else, you have not. It is a question. It has always been a question. The Vessin had never in their history been asked one. Hemi went through it with a precision that made the air feel thin. The teaha turned in his hands, the wood cracking against his palms, and he covered the ground between the 2 lines in a series of low, driving movements. And at the end of it, he laid a small green frond on the road in front of Captain Orvek's boots. Then he backed away, still facing them, and he never once dropped his eyes. Orvek stared at the frond. His helmet analysis offered him 3 interpretations ranked by confidence. Ceremonial submission, 61%. Territorial marking, 22%. Unknown, 17%. Captain Orvek was a competent officer and a fundamentally unimaginative one, and he chose 61%. He stepped forward and crushed the frond under his heel. Behind Hemi, 206 people took one breath at exactly the same time. Then the Haka began. It did not start loud. That is the part people always get wrong. It started with the hands, a fast tremble held out in front of the body, and with the feet, and the first stamp landed like a single enormous door closing somewhere underground. The second stamp landed on the beat after it. By the fourth, the road was ringing. Then the voices came in underneath. 200 chests, all in the same low register, all landing on the same beat, on a rhythm those people had been holding since before there were ships in the sky. Their words were their own from their own valley, about their own ground and their own dead and their own refusal. Their eyes were wide. Their tongues were out. Every single one of them was leaning forward. On the flagship, 3 things happened in the space of 11 seconds. The first was the fear map. It inverted. The array had been built on one assumption, that stress chemistry plus forward movement equals a predator, and stress chemistry plus retreat equals prey. And it had never in 23 campaigns been handed a population that produced both signatures at once and pointed them uphill. The system resolved the contradiction the only way its logic allowed. It reclassified the humans as the apex threat in the engagement, and it reclassified every Vessin unit inside the perimeter as prey requiring extraction. Every friendly marker on the tactical board turned amber. The second was the resonance lattice. The 18 Hertz carrier that held the Vessin ground network in lockstep had been running unopposed all day. Now 200 people were stamping into a geothermal crust that carried vibration like a struck drum, and the harmonics stacked. And the lattice began trying to synchronize to a signal that was not its own. Vessin visors filled with contradictions. Range readings ran backwards. Friendly units appeared as targets. A drone over the lakefront reclassified a bus shelter as a command asset and destroyed it with commendable accuracy. The third thing was simpler. The troopers in the front rank, who had no readouts telling them anything and only their own nervous systems to consult, took a step back. Not a tactical withdrawal, a step, the kind an animal takes. "Hold the line," Orvek said, and his own translator, drowning in interference, delivered the order to his squad as an instruction to lie down in the water. 3 troopers looked at the lake in confusion. And on the bridge of the flagship, Fleet Commander Draveth watched the amber markers spread across his own formation and made the decision that ended the invasion of Earth. "Bring us down," he said. Low directly over them, full suppression. Pell turned around slowly. "Commander, the survey flagged that entire district as an active thermal field. It advised a minimum standoff of 2 kilometers. The survey," said Draveth, "also called that recreational chanting. The Vessin flagship came down over the middle of Rotorua at 400 meters. And it was, for about 90 seconds, the most frightening thing anyone in that city had ever seen. It blocked out the last of the daylight. Its 4 pylons swung down and locked, and the deep blue glow beneath them lit every steaming vent in the park below, so that the whole reserve looked like a field of small blue fires. Windows on Fenton Street cracked, car alarms gave up, the lake went flat. Underneath it, 206 people did not stop. That was the detail Draveth would never manage to explain afterwards at the hearing with the recording playing. The ship came down on top of them and the rhythm did not break. It got louder. "Suppression in 6, said the weapons officer. Walt Briggs was standing on the bandstand at the edge of the gardens with a pair of binoculars and a radio, and he keyed it twice. "Ray." Now would be the time. 4 streets away, Commander Ray Alden was standing beside a fire appliance with a hose reel in his hand and an expression of deep professional discomfort. Because what he was about to do was, in every doctrine he had ever studied, insane. Rotorua has a geyser about half an hour south of the city called Lady Knox, and every single morning at 10:15. A guide walks up to it in front of a crowd and drops in a measure of surfactant. Soap, it breaks the surface tension between the cooler water on top and the superheated water beneath it, and about a minute later the geyser goes up. It has been done daily for over 100 years. It is a genuine, documented, entirely mundane piece of geothermal showmanship. Walt Briggs had spent his exchange year studying the vents under Curacao Park. He knew which 4 of them were connected. He knew that 2 of them had gone off without warning in 2001, and again in 2003, and had thrown mud 200 meters. And he knew that the only thing those vents had ever needed was a reason. The city had provided a reason. 200 people had been stamping into that crust for 6 minutes, and every seismic instrument the Geological Service had in the district was drawing lines that Walt would later describe. In a paper that was never published, as extremely encouraging. The soap was Walt's idea, the fire appliance was Ray's. "For the record," Ray said into the radio, "I want it noted that I advised against this." "Noted," said Walt. "Open the valve." They put 900 liters of foam concentrate down 4 vents in under a minute. The ground took 20 seconds to think about it. Then Curacao Park stood up. The first column came out of the largest vent and went past the flagship's port pylon at something close to 200 kilometers an hour, and it was not water. It was water and mud and superheated steam and about 600 years of dissolved sulfur, and it hit the underside of a warship that had been designed against dust. The second column came up 11 seconds later, 40 meters to the east, straight into a pylon housing. Steam does 2 things to a machine. It cooks it and it gets inside it. Hydrogen sulfide does a 3rd thing, which is that it goes after every contact and every seal and every exposed run of copper on the vessel, and it does it fast. And it does not stop when you switch the vents off, because you cannot switch the vents off. On the bridge, every panel went white. "Lift," Draveth said. "Lift now. Port bank is not responding, Commander." "Then use the starboard." That technically was a correct order. The starboard bank came up to full power against a port bank that had already surrendered, and the Vesson flagship, 600 meters of interstellar command vessel, began a slow and extremely dignified rotation to the left, out over the water in front of the entire city. It struck the lake at an angle on its side and put up a wall of white that soaked the lakefront and every person on it. It slid. It struck the shallow shelf near Sulphur Point and stopped there, embedded, with a 1/3 of its upper hull still above the surface, leaning like something that had been dropped rather than landed. For perhaps 4 seconds, Rotorio was completely silent. Then Hemi and Gata brought the Haka to its finish, and 200 people ended it together, on the beat, with 1 stamp, and the sound of that came back off the wrecked hull and rolled across the water. Arohakatin wiped lake water off her face. "Right," she said. "Somebody ring the council." The Vesson ground force surrendered over the following 2 hours, and they surrendered in pieces. Because their network had died with the ship, and nobody had told them what to do. 19 troopers came out of the redwood forest with their hands up, because a forestry crew had dropped 4 trees across the only road out, and then simply waited. 11 surrendered at the airport to a fire crew. 6 surrendered to a golf club. Captain Orvek surrendered on the lake road to Hemi and Gata personally, which he did by putting down his rifle, walking forward, and standing there with no idea what came next. Hemi looked at him for a long moment, then he bent down, picked up the crushed frond from the road, and held it out. Orvek did not understand it. He took it anyway. Fleet Commander Draveth got out through a hull breach with 9 of his guard, and made it as far as the geothermal reserve fence at the edge of the valley, where he stopped. Because his suit was failing, and because in front of him was a boiling terrace field at night with steam coming off it in white sheets. And behind him was a town that had just knocked his flagship into a lake with its voice. Wedu Ruidi was sitting on the fence. "You cannot go that way," she said. "Why not?" "Because it is not ground," said Wedu. "It is a lid." Draveth looked at her. He looked at the steam. Then, with the last functioning piece of equipment on his person, he opened a channel and formally requested terms. "What are your conditions?" his translator asked. Aroha stepped up beside Wedu with a clipboard she had found in the fire station, and on it in blue biro was a list. "1 hangi," she read. "1 landing craft off Ranulph Street. 1 tanker of thermal mud, 11 meters of my neighbor's fence, the bus shelter. And you can put the ground back the way you found it." Draveth stared at the steaming valley behind her and the wrecked flagship leaning in the lake, and the 12-ton walker still sitting in a hot spring with mud drying on it. "That," he said, "is impossible." "Now," said Hemi, coming up out of the dark behind him, "you are starting to understand where you are." The New Zealand Defence Force arrived the next morning at 7:10, which everybody agreed was very good going. They found 141 Vesson personnel held at the showgrounds, 7 landing craft in various states of embarrassment, a command vessel lying on its side in the lake, and a district that had already restored its own power, opened 3 of its 4 supermarkets, and set up a soup table. The officer commanding was a career soldier who had been briefed twice on the flight, and believed roughly 1/3 of it. He walked into the Mary, took off his hat, and asked the question he had been asked to ask. "Who is in charge here?" 11 people pointed in 6 directions. He tried again. "Who organized the defense?" Depends, said Arawa. Is there compensation? Compensation for what? For my till, said Arawa, for the bus shelter. For a hangi that 68 people did not get to eat. Ma'am, an alien warship went into the lake. Yes, she said. And it is still there, and it is going to affect the fishing. The official report took 4 months and ran to 900 pages. And it described the events at Rotorua as a coordinated civilian response, leveraging localized environmental knowledge, improvised acoustic countermeasures, and geothermal terrain denial. The people of Rotorua described it as Tuesday. Commander Ray Alden of the United States Navy wrote his own account and sent it up his chain. It was returned twice for clarification. The section that caused the most trouble was 4 lines long and stated that a hostile fleet had lost tactical coherence because 200 civilians had performed a traditional posture dance at it. In unison, Ray added a footnote explaining the physics. The footnote was longer than the report. Walt Briggs was invited to present his findings to a scientific panel in Wellington. He opened with a slide showing the seismic trace from that evening, and he said one sentence that was quoted for years afterwards. "The ground did not save that town," he said. "The town knew the ground, and that is a completely different thing, and it is the only kind of advantage that cannot be bought." The Vesson Dominion withdrew from the solar system inside 9 days. Their fleet broadcast a general advisory across the Dominion, and it was short. The third planet of the yellow star is not viable. Its crust is not load-bearing. Its atmosphere is corrosive at ground level in the target region. Its population does not scatter. Underneath, added personally by former Fleet Commander Draveth after a hearing that lasted 6 days, was one final line. "If the inhabitants stop what they are doing, form ranks, and begin to stamp, you are already too late. Leave." Rotorua, meanwhile, got on with it. The flagship stayed in the lake, because moving it turned out to be a problem for a government department rather than a problem for a town. Within a month, there were boat tour. Within 2 months, somebody was selling a t-shirt. Within 3 months, visitors were confusing the wreck with a completely unrelated local legend, and one tour operator had begun quietly encouraging it. Tama Broughton's family held their reunion 9 days late, with a hangi laid at 4 in the morning, and they set a place at the end of the long table for a very confused Vesson trooper named Nesh, who was still in custody, and who was escorted there and back by 2 very serious soldiers, and who ate more than anybody else at the table. That was Hemi's idea, and nobody argued with it, because on that Mary there is a word for what you do with people once the fighting has stopped. You feed them. You look after them. That is not weakness, and it is not forgiveness. It is simply the standard you refuse to lower, no matter who is sitting across from you. Draveth never understood it. He asked about it at the hearing. He said that the same people who had knocked his ship out of the sky had, 4 days later, given his soldiers hot food and dry clothes, and he said he could not reconcile those 2 facts, and that his inability to reconcile them was the reason he had lost. He was closer to the truth than he knew. If this story got you, drop a comment and tell me the exact line where you knew the Vesson had already lost. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the loudest thing on any battlefield is a group of people who refuse to run. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. 2 years later, there is a photograph on the wall of the Waranui at the western edge of Rotorua. It is not of the wreck. It is of a group of children, 11 of them, standing in 2 rows on wet grass at 6 in the morning with their hands out in front of them, trembling. Hemi Ngata still takes that class. He is older now, and his knees still keep their own schedule. And he starts every single session the same way, with the same question, because the children always assume they know the answer. What is a Haka? And they say what children always say, a war dance. A challenge, a scary thing you do to the other team, and Hemi shakes his head every time. He tells them about a chief named T. Roparaha, more than 200 years ago, who was hunted by his enemies and who hid in a pit in the ground and waited to die there, and who climbed out into the daylight and found that he was still alive. And he tells them what that man said when he came out, the words that half the world has now heard and almost nobody understands. It is death, it is death. It is life, it is life. It is not about killing anybody, Hemi tells them. It never was. It is what you say when you are still standing and they thought you would not be. It is the sound life makes. Then he steps back onto the wet grass, and he counts them in, and 11 children stamp on the ground of a valley that has been steaming quietly for 600 years. And somewhere very far away, in an archive belonging to an empire that no longer comes this way, that sound is still filed under threats we did not survive.